Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net, joining us for another episode of Ask Rabbi Singer or Ask Tovia or Ask whatever it is. Whatever I put up as the title of this, it's what it is this week. It changes every week. Um, uh, Rabbi Singer's just got back from a tour in Israel. There's two tours in as many months. We're really happy to have him back. Also, don't forget to head over to Outreach Judaism and buy his two-volume work, uh, which I have on the shelf up here, and it's never very far away. Let's Get Biblical series. Now you might have the, I won't say older book, but his first edition. This is brand new and it's all updated. It came out I think early last year, and it's well worth getting. Awesome stuff. You can go and buy that there or on Amazon if you want. Welcome back, Rabbi Singer. It's really good to see you. This is the first. Actually, this is the first show I've done this year in this secular year, 2016. So you're number one for this year, which I'm pleased to say. Did you have a great time in Israel in December? I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, both tours we did were just amazing. It was just, I've done so many tours over the years, and these were the best tours, the ones that we did with Jono. And then a nice sized tour that we went with Indonesian folks to the Holy Land, walking through Scripture. Um, I miss it terribly, and many of the people who have gone on our tour and the tour that followed, people talk about the physical jet lag, but I think the spiritual jet lag that creates the vacuum has left a lot of people who did not expect to feel that sense of emptiness and void not being in the land of Israel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it was interesting because for many of us that went, before we went, we only knew um, many of the other people in a two-dimensional way through Facebook, and then suddenly you get to spend 2 weeks with these people in Israel, experiencing all this cool stuff, and then you get home, and it's painful because the community that you felt, that's detracted somewhat now, and you're on your own again, and it's quite harsh, and it's you almost wonder whether it was better to not know what it was like to be around so many like-minded people, especially if for many of us you don't get to live in a community. So I'm looking forward to, God willing, we'll be back on the tour bus in November. You can head over to Truth to You now and put down your deposit if you want to join us 2 weeks in the Holy Land. It's going to be really cool. So we have a question, one that comes up quite a lot. This one's from Facebook, and the question this week is: why do you place the Talmud over the Bible? Did you forget Deuteronomy 4:2? Where did God say it's okay to add to my words as long as it's for instruction and learning? Where does it say that in the Bible that the Talmud is divinely inspired? I think the core crux of this question is: why does Judaism use the Talmud as a point of reference? Isn't that against the Torah to add to the Torah?
I, so to help the, it is very clear to me, and whoever you are, I don't mean this condescendingly, but it's inconceivable, almost inconceivable, that someone who comes from a traditional Jewish background of my own would ask that question. Uh, Someone, it would be the equivalent of asking a Christian, if you're a Christian, just so you get this, uh, how do you have the book of Isaiah and consider that the word of God? Isn't having the book of Isaiah adding to the law? Isn't calling Jeremiah a holy book adding to the 5 books of Moses, adding to the law? Doesn't it violate Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2? How could you possibly have a book like Zechariah? What are you doing with a book like Hosea? You're adding to the Torah. That's if you want to know, like, how does a religious Jew process that question? So if you're a Christian, that's exactly the way you would recoil at that question. It is, I think, almost a perfect a perfect parallel to how a religious Jew processes that. And strange, I mean, you have to pause for a moment and wonder, why is it that the only people who question the oral Torah, it appears, are those who don't keep it? For those of us who do keep the oral Torah, as someone else who comes from a Methodist background, uh, who loves the book of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah doesn't add anything to the five books of Moses in terms of commandments. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2 tells us that you cannot add any commandments to the Torah. For example, you're not allowed to, the Torah tells us on Sukkot, you can't, you have to have 4 species that you shake, you can't add a 5th. Strangely, the same people, and I don't know if this person's a Christian or not, don't seem to have a problem with the entire works of Paul. And Paul wrote a considerable part of the New Testament. He constantly is saying that you don't have to keep the law, and that he's taking away from the Torah, saying it's been made a curse for us. And it's not just for Gentiles, as most people think, but Paul is addressing Jews in Romans 7 as an example. But that said, I think that there's something behind this question. It seems to me, because for a long time I wondered why people are asking this question, because these Christians brag about the fact that Jesus and Paul came from a Pharisaic background. They believed in the oral Torah. The Christian Bible says the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. In fact, almost none of the stories in the Gospels with Jesus arguing with his interlocutors is over anything in the written Torah. It's almost always in the oral Torah. And Jesus never, it means even in the New Testament, never criticizes the Pharisees, and they're always being criticized, never criticizing them for adding to the law, for having an oral Torah. It doesn't even exist. This conversation doesn't exist. But here's where I think it comes from. I think that people who were in the church may feel that they've been lied to for a very long time. They have believed things that were not in the Bible, meaning in the Tanakh and the Hebrew Scriptures. For years, they devoted their lives to worshiping Jesus, believing the doctrine of the Trinity, presuming that these central doctrines of salvation must be all over the Jewish Scriptures, and they just took a man's word for it. And I think that when Christians begin to apprehend that, in fact, the fundamental creeds expressed in the New Testament and in the church are not only inconsistent with Tanakh, but are opposed by the prophets of Israel, there, I think, emerges a trust issue. This is my feeling. This is what I sense. There's a sense of, I'm not doing this again. I am not going to ever put myself in a position where I'm going to be in a relationship and find out that I've been cheated on. And that's really what it is. That's what it seems to me. And this is very, very hard for people, because they go, you know what, I'm not doing this again. Because the last time I didn't follow exactly what it says in the Tanakh, but I allowed other ideas of men to creep in, I wound up committing adultery against the God of Israel. And I won't do it again. And if I'm going to do that, I better have a lot of evidence, because these are fantastic claims. This is my feeling. Now, for the Jew who's been religious all of his life, he or she knows that it is not possible to keep the commandments without an oral Torah. You can't even read your Bible without an oral Torah. The very vowels under the letters, which tell us not only how to pronounce the words, but what the words mean, are only derived from the oral Torah. Jason, you and I went through on Torah Pearls 2.0. We went through the entire 5 books of Moses together. You can just move those vowels together. We've done it 100 times. And just the placement of those vowels, which is entirely oral Torah. will change the entire meaning. So as it turns out, this will shock some people. The Christian Bibles in 99.9% of the time rely on the oral Torah, our vowels, to tell them what the word means and not only what sound it makes. So therefore, to the religious, we're going, what are you talking about? We wouldn't, if the Torah tells us we're to slaughter an animal, but doesn't say how to do it, we, of course, have to have that information. There's a massive amount of missing information in the Jewish scriptures. So let's walk this back and explain what the oral Torah is for those who are listening. Why to us the oral Torah is exactly what the book of Isaiah is.
Can we as well, because I think we may have, and my personal experience of moving from Christianity to where I am now, I know that this is sometimes what happens. People take the word Talmud and they take the word oral Torah and they think it's the same thing, when it isn't, because the Talmud is more about the conversation through Jewish learning and the sages and tradition to try and understand some of what the oral Torah is trying to say, right? And so what happens is that we then believe that for us outsiders, we see when we hear Talmud, we think oral Torah, but it's not necessarily that. And it's worth mentioning that the Torah does say that if a matter is too difficult, you should turn to the sages of the day. And I thought that it's worth bringing that in, that the Talmud is as much about learning and tradition and intellect as it is about the core principles that are listed in it.
The Talmud is, I'm pretty sure, the largest single body of literature from the ancient world that exists, period. We're talking about 6,500 folios. We're talking about a document that's so large that if you read a folio a day, it would take you some 7.5 years to complete it. It really is not monolithic. So the Talmud contains information about how to treat people properly, the oral Torah, a discussion of new living cases and how to apply it. The Talmud contains the kind of wisdom literature that you would encounter in the book of Proverbs, and prayer literature and praise literature that you'd encounter in the book of Psalms. So this is not a monolithic book, but again, when someone uses the word Talmud, and again, whoever asked this question, I am grateful to you, because it means you're thinking about God and His Torah, and you're not thinking about who's going to win the World Series. It means that your mind is in the right place. So let's just very clear, we're going to use the word oral Torah because Talmud is so not monolithic. Talmud is full of enormous sayings, parables. It's all there. It's beyond the scope of this broadcast to go into it, but I have to explain what the oral Torah is. Okay. First of all, the Talmud does not add one other commandment to the 613 that we encounter in the 5 books of Moses. It would be like a newspaper where you saw the headlines, and imagine you took a scissor and cut them out and put them on a wall. And so you get a sense by looking at the headline of what the story is about. You'd have an incipit, but you wouldn't have how to do it, or what happened, all the details. The oral law tells us, well, how do you implement this? Example, when the Torah says that you may not do any work on Shabbat, or you have to afflict your soul on Yom Kippur, on the 10th day of the 7th month, and if you don't, you'll be put to death. What does that mean, to afflict? You've got to get it. It can't be whatever you think it means. The reason it can't be subjective is because the punishment is a capital punishment. Now, as it turns out, it was almost unheard of for the capital punishment to be carried out because of the high standard of evidence necessary in the book of Deuteronomy. But it's clear that there's something very specific. The Talmud lists for us, for example, what activities are uniquely prohibited on Yom Kippur so that you are properly afflicting your soul. Because the Shia in Iran, they have a holiday called Ashura. In fact, all Muslims do. But they beat themselves and whip themselves on that day. Maybe that's what Yom Kippur means. So obviously, there had to be some meaning. There had to be very specifically, this is what you're permitted to do. This is what you're not allowed to do on Yom Kippur.
Because I think it's fair to say, right, that the Hebrew word for afflicted in the sense of Yom Kippur doesn't mean fasting in the whole of the Tanakh. It means tons of other things. It's raping and slavery and a whole load of things, but it never means fasting. So if we are to only use the Tanakh for that, then the one thing you can't do if you only use the Tanakh is fast on Yom Kippur. You can do many other things, but if you're going to take this Tanakh as your only source, when it gets to Yom Kippur, fasting is what you don't do.
In fact, that's brilliant, Jason. That's brilliant. And I'll take it further. We know that Isaiah was a Pharisaic Jew and believed in the oral Torah. Why? Because in Isaiah 58, Isaiah happens to mention Agavurche, which means just passingly, that on Yom Kippur, in Isaiah 58, the Yom Kippur, that the Jewish people do not eat on this day, on this Sabbath, the Sabbath. Now, Isaiah lived, now stop for a moment. Isaiah lived 600 years after the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, approximately. So what that means, what did they do for 600 years? Obviously, Isaiah is telling us that the Jews always knew, in fact, because he's not saying, I've got a new idea for you. It's just passively saying, and you're fasting on your Sabbath the Sabbath. It's actually in the context of a criticism that the social justice is inadequate. But the point, that means that is not even the point of his message. So it's not like Isaiah is the father of Orthodox Pharisaic Judaism. He's just saying, that they're fasting on their Sabbath of Sabbaths. So therefore, if it is a violation to say that fasting on Yom Kippur is a commandment, because it would be. This is very important. If we are wrong, I want to make this clear. First of all, we're going to work out the story. If the Jews are wrong, that means Orthodox, traditional, hated Judaism is wrong. I threw that in to make sure you're paying attention. If we're wrong, then saying that you must fast on Yom Kippur is not just incorrect, it's a sin. It is a sin because the Torah says, as you said in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, that you can't add to the Torah, which you can't add to the Torah. You can't say that on Yom Kippur that the Torah commands us to beat ourselves over the head. You're not allowed to do that. If you do that, you've violated the commandment. So therefore, the oral Torah does not add to does not add a commandment, but rather the oral Torah tells us how to. The Torah says this should be the first month. What month should be? How do you count the months? How do you intercalate extra months to keep Passover in the springtime? How would you keep Shabbat? What work are you not allowed to do? Can I pick up this microphone in my hand? This is work. Is it prohibited? Maybe I can't. Maybe can I pick up this bottle? Can I do that? There's work, but I can't do it. As it turns out, although technically this is work, but it isn't work as far as Shabbos goes. There are 39 prohibitions, prohibited types of activity that's forbidden on Shabbos. And incidentally, and here's this settles the case. We see repeatedly in the prophets, who you, the questioner, believe in, that they warned the Jews to keep this oral law. It means your question was, where does the Bible tell us that there's a Talmud? It tells us exactly that, except of course it doesn't use the word Talmud because that exact word hadn't been invented yet. But we find, for example, in the book of Nehemiah, it says to keep the Talmud. The only thing is he doesn't say Talmud. He says, don't buy and sell on the Sabbath day. Jeremiah 17, 18, 19, 20 says, keep the Talmud. What do you mean? He says, you can't carry from a public domain to a private domain. The prophet Haggai says, keep the Talmud. Of course he doesn't say keep the Talmud, because the word hadn't been invented yet. Not just a word. But in the book of Haggai, just a brain set. Just understand how important this is. The Jews, Haggai was one of the three last prophets of the Jewish people, along with Zechariah and Malachi. The Jews were now building the second temple. Yes, and the Jews were shattered. Why? Because the other temple had been destroyed because the Jews had just been a disaster, and Jeremiah had screamed at them, reference verse chapter 7, that you idiots, your temple isn't going to save you, your sacrifices isn't going to save you. Do not say the temple are these, the temple are these. It won't help you. Don't you get it? Your rituals and temple is not going to help you. When did I tell you? So, what effect? Listen up, Kindlech. Listen up. What effect did the banging over the head of Jeremiah have on the people who were saying to them, the blood sacrifice are just not important. It's all the other things that are important. Now, when Jews are coming back for the second time, needing to build a second temple, not many, but 40,000, what was on their mind? They're going, all right, God doesn't care about sacrifice. It's not really important. We know we messed it up. So they actually were like, is this really important? And Haggai is going, hey, I'm going to test you guys. You guys do have to know the laws of sacrifices. And he starts asking these questions. If something touches your cloak, if food touches that, and that. And you go, I defy anyone to explain that. You can't explain it without the oral Torah. All the questions of impurity that are there are. Here's one other crazy thing. So Christians have sects and Jews have sects. We have heresies like everyone, and we have heterodox groups like every other religion. As it turns out, we have a heterodox group called the Karaites. Now, what did they have to do? The Karaite is a schism that goes back to the early medieval period of a massive split, of a massive break in the Jewish people, let's say 7th century, 8th century, in that period. And then you have this breakaway sect that said, we don't believe in the oral Torah. But here's what's interesting is, remember I said to you earlier, you can't keep the Torah unless you know the oral Torah. So what did the Karaites do, who said, we don't believe in the oral law? Now what they were really doing is, they were rejecting the ecclesiastical authority of the sages, of the rabbis. They had to invent their own oral law. I'm not kidding. Now, I'm not talking about the Karaite who lives in San Francisco, who belongs to a Karaite group online. Those are not the serious people. But if you go to Karaite communities in Israel, they have their own method of slaughtering an animal. Not only that, this will shock you. The Karaites have their own shechita, their own way of slaughtering an animal. And I'm not talking about the American Karaites that wear a badge and go to the meetings. Forget them. These are just people who go online and whatever. I'm not talking about the guy, from Florida who signed up on a Karaite website. He doesn't know anything about this. I'm talking about the Alta Karaites, which means the Karaites from Egypt, the Karaites from Turkey. They will not eat an animal, eat meat in a kosher restaurant. Why? Because it was slaughtered according to Pharisaic, they call us rabbinic shechita, and not Karaite slaughtering. Hold on. Stop the show. I'm not kidding. I'm just right now, take my word for that. Go look it up. They had to manufacture their own oral law, or they'll call traditions. Why? Why did they do that? You think this was pleasant? This was horrible for them, but they had to do it because they have to slaughter an animal in a certain way. You have to the blood has to go somewhere. So they develop their own traditions. So, so therefore, it is not possible to keep the written Torah without the oral Torah. The oral Torah does not add to the commandments in any way, but rather just tells us how to do it. One last example is very quick. I have a whole chapter in my first volume of Let's Get Biblical. Um,
It's worth mentioning as well that the Karaites have their own synagogues and their own rabbis, and in the synagogues there is an ark and there is a Torah scroll, and there's this whole hierarchy of things which people don't associate with Karaites because for the most part, social media, the people who support Karaism on social media don't really know what Karaites do. They only have most, to be fair, I'm going to say most people only have an understanding of what they think Karaites are because of one person, and that one person has filled out for them what they think Karaism is, but it's not. Karaites, they go to synagogue, they have rabbis, they have a complete structure and tradition, and an oral passing of that tradition to other people. There's this idea that they don't have an oral law, but they absolutely do have an oral law,
oh
and
yeah,
they have all the
sure
physical
do.
trappings of any other sect of Judaism.
Let me just give one other example. Last example. I'll just think about it. Okay, the Bible says in Exodus that if you poke out someone's eye in tachas ayin, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Okay. Now let me ask you a question. If a blind person goes and pokes out another man's eye, how does he punish? You really going to pluck out his eye? How do you? It doesn't make sense. I mean, do you really? If you don't believe in the oral Torah says when it says an eye for an eye, it does not mean you pluck out the person's eye. It doesn't mean that, but rather what it means is that you have to compensate the person monetarily for the loss of the eye, for the embarrassment, the loss of wages, and so on. This is very complex in how do you assess the value of an eye? I'm not going to go there, but the key is if you don't believe in the oral Torah, that means you believe that a person's eye is you have to pluck out the person who offends it. You have to kill women who have an abortion. Why don't you? Why don't any woman who has an abortion go? She should be put to death. Ask yourself that question. Without an oral Torah, that's what you believe. So therefore, what really happens, I think, is for many ex-Christians, until they actually live Jewish life, and this is where the transition happens. As long as the former Christian is living in a Christian world, they struggle with this. This is a very big struggle. And I say it to you honestly, there's a reason in the Bible why we're told to live in the Machna, in the encampment of the Jewish people. And why Reuben and Gad and Menashe were confronted over the fact that they wanted to live on the other side of the Jordan River. I'm not going to lie to you. It's very clear that Hashem wants those who are part of the children of Israel, or wish to cleave to the children of Israel, to live in the encampment of the Jewish children of Israel. And if you don't, I'm not saying you will be led astray, but your understanding of God is just academic. It's on a computer screen. It's in a book. You're not really living it. And people who convert to Judaism, they must move into a Jewish community for many, many reasons. But this is the big one. Unless you live the life of a Torah Jew, you can't understand it. It's just academic. It's only on a piece of paper. You're just understanding ideas. But until you actually try to apply it, it becomes absolutely impossible. So I say this to you who were in the church and have struggled with this, it's because you're not living in a Jewish community. This becomes a problem. The moment you're living in the Jewish community and see how observant Torah Jews live, just like Nehemiah lived, immediately it becomes clear to you that the oral Torah telling us how to live every moment, when to say Shema in the morning, everything is expressed explicit. Without an oral Torah, we would never understand how to observe it. But this is the problem of people who live in a spiritual wilderness.
Okay, no, and I completely agree. Certainly from my perspective, it's many years before I got around that concept, and it was because of the baggage that I was carrying out of where I'd been. I took off my Jesus T-shirt, but I was still wearing the boxer shorts of shame and the overcoat of anti-Semitism. It takes a while to get because you're told for so long that you can't listen to these and all these Jesus stories and the rabbis are evil and all this stuff. So I'd suggest if anyone has got concerns or worries, to study around the subject. Find out what a Talmud is before you decide you don't like it.
And one point, if you are a Christian watching the show, if you would have told a first century Christian that there is no oral Torah, they would have sent you to a psychiatrist. I mean, this was unknown to the earliest Christians. You see, as I said, oral Torah all over the place. Paul says the oracles were given to the Jewish people, Romans chapter 3. I mean, the only people who don't have the truth are the Sadducees in the Christian Bible, because they didn't believe in the oral Torah. Now here's one other point. There are traditions that we have that are not in the written Torah, that are not in the oral Torah. That means, for example, which some Christians keep actually, and that's lighting a Hanukkah menorah. Where does God command us to light a Hanukkah menorah? So all you people who oppose lighting a Hanukkah menorah, I don't know what to do. I would say you're adding to law. By the way, Hanukkah is in the Christian Bible. So the Torah does call upon us to act modestly, for men and women not to dress like the nations of the world. What precisely is that modesty? Is there certain things that people do in order to protect the integrity of the Jewish family? Is there certain boundaries that we put up around? The Torah does say that you should guard my commandments. Well, how are we to do that? So we do, if for example, we don't buy and sell on Shabbat. And that's in Nehemiah chapter 10 and 13. Look it up yourself. So a religious Jew doesn't touch money. It's very much the way other people who don't even know anything about the oral Torah, they know that adultery is forbidden. But I think that many people would say, I think going into a strip club, while it technically is not adultery, is in a sense, you're going to wind up in sin. And a person who really loves their spouse would never go to such a place. So that we're not saying that going to a place like that or going to a naked beach, whatever people do, we're not saying that that's adultery, but certainly you'd be a fool to believe that you can be in an environment like that and it will not lead you to sin. So therefore, a Jew who fears God does not go into such a place. That is a tradition. That's a tradition of Jewish people as they protecting the commandments. But we are not allowed to say that that is the commandment, and that's a critical distinction that has to be asserted.
Fences, right? It's about fences. This is my wife's a vegetarian, and she doesn't eat meat. That's the whole point of being a vegetarian. But she doesn't just buy vegetables and hope that's enough. When she goes out to the shops and she gets a tin of pasta sauce or bag of chips, she checks the back to make sure that they're good for vegetarian. Even if it's cheese and onion or ready salted, she'll still check the back. And when I read Talmud passages that talk about these fences, that's how I look at them. That it's not saying that if you want to eat chips, you have to read the bag. You're just making sure that you won't make a mistake there and putting something in place that protects you and protects the thing that you're trying to cherish.
Jason, just as a point, it actually says that in the Torah. It's not like the rabbis went and go, this is really dangerous business. We should protect laws. The Torah tells us it's actually a commandment to protect laws. Look up Leviticus chapter 18, verse 30. It literally says, and you should guard my guards. You should guard my laws. You find the same thing in Exodus 23. The Bible it's not like it would be a nice thing. Jews wanted to go, look, I feel weak in a certain area. I'm going to put up a fence so that I'm faithful to my Lord. Fine. But this is even further. The Torah actually commands us to place fences up. Now, those fences are not the biblical commandment. Those fences we call fences. That means if I'm not allowed to buy and sell on the Sabbath day, so religious Jews go, okay, then we don't touch money. If we don't light a fire on Sabbath, we don't touch a book of matches. Why? Because it might lead us to lighting a fire. It might lead us to using the money. The Torah actually says that you should put up safeguards in order to protect the integrity of my commandments.
Good. You know what? I think that might be it. But that was awesome. We fit much more in there than I thought we were going to. I hope you've enjoyed it at home. If you've got questions on this, further questions, leave them in the comments under the video and we will get back to them. It's such a huge subject, and I know a lot of people passionately don't understand or are passionately against it, and many people are passionately for it. And I can honestly say that I've done a 180 on this subject over the last few years as I've learnt more about it and tried to open my mind a little bit to the concept. So I just want to say thank you, Rabbi Singer, for joining us again. It's really awesome. It's one of the thrills of my week is getting to spend some time with you. And thank you at home for watching. Head over to Outreach Judaism. Buy his books. They are awesome. There's also a whole load of free stuff on there, videos and audio. And is toviasinger.tv, is that the video site?
Yes, toviasinger.tv and outreachjudaism.org.
Brilliant. And so we, insider information here, but when my wife and I go to bed at night time, we stick the tablet on and we find a playlist of shows and we listen to Rabbi Singer as we go to sleep. I'm not saying that he makes us go to sleep. I'm saying that if you're going to have a few minutes left of consciousness, you want to fill it with good things.
That's it.
Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That's a true story.
Wow, that's